Yeah, I know. We're skipping years. It's kind of like amazing how quickly we go through my life. I feel like I'm 100 now.
A lot happens in a day.
I know. And people can't understand how I get to do so much. The thing is, I hate sitting around.
Welcome to the Beauty Seed.
Last time you were talking about Egypt and
Oh,
Cairo, which is
man.
not a quiet place, it sounds like, other than for deaf
Well,
people.
you know, I think I learned a lot while I was there because hanging out with the deaf people, they're very observant and they can lip read. So even though you don't speak the language, they can tell you quite a lot what's going on around you. So it's kind of very interesting on that point. I mean, like, I used to hang out in the evenings and just play chess and backgammon. And I think just drinking tea and that social young age at university where you can actually just relax. And I don't think any of us were actually into drugs at that point. So it was like, tea was pretty safe.
Mhm.
And it was kind of funny. I got into routine hanging out with the deaf kids, catching the bus in the morning from the university to go to this school, Misra, which was basically one of the only girls' school in Egypt at the time, and I didn't know about Muslim customs. So I kind of got acquainted, got into a routine, started showing up. I was a tutor at first, eventually became the teacher. Um, the lady that was hanging out in the classroom couldn't translate really well. Her English was bad. So I struggled. Customs, different things. It was like pretty hectic, but time really stands still when you get involved and you forget about your worries. Things just kind of go along. And before I knew it, I'd almost been there 7 months. And then I think one afternoon, when I was sitting there in the dormitory, one of the students told me that I had to go and check on my passport. And I was like, okay. So I went down to this hotel room and had this meeting with this guy for about 5 minutes. And he told me that if my passport was available, it would be available in Israel. So it's like, woo, cool. Not thinking of the consequences or how the fuck to get there. So I don't know. I went back to dormitory, spoke to a lot of the deaf kids. John told me that if I had to go because it's my passport might be my only way out. So I turned up at school, had my ceremony, said goodbye, resigned, said bye to a lot of the deaf kids, and caught a bus to the Gaza border crossing between the Sinai Peninsula and Israel
So tell
and
me, what is
Jordan.
what does that crossing look like?
Um, Gee, you driving on a bus and it's very flat and arid. You come across, there's a mountain off on the one side of you. It's called Mount Sinai. If you look off into the east, there's the Jordan, the Sinai Peninsula that is part of the Jordan, and the Dead Sea is part of that as well. And it goes out into this peninsula, which is called the Red Sea. And it's kind of the boundary between Jordan and, oh, sorry, I didn't see that, between Jordan and Israel and Sinai and
Mhm.
the Suez Canal. So it's kind of a lot of things happening. It's very arid. There's not a lot of people living there. And at the time, I knew that there was Nuweiba, Caribbean, and this other place called Dahab. And Dahab is about 16 kilometers from the Gaza Strip.
Mhm.
So I kind of got on the bus in the morning, sat anxiously trying to get to the border as quick as possible to get through the border, thinking it was just going to be a song and a dance. And
Yeah.
I thought it was all going to be easy. But this bloody light behind me is annoying.
Yeah.
Okay. So what happened? I remember getting off the bus and looking at this rummage of buildings. They were really flat roofs, kind of tan, gray buildings, doors on either side. Like you walk in the one side, you walk out the other side kind of thing. And then there was barbed wire contingent with a blockade between the Israeli and Egyptian side, which was about 50 meters or so. And I walked up to the Egyptian side, and the Egyptian guy said, "Emshi, like, fuck off, leave me alone." And I was like, "Oh, well, okay." So I just kind of noticed that everybody was filing into the one side of the building. So I kind of thought, oh, that's my get out of jail free card. And I got into the building and I was standing in line, and I didn't have any papers on me. I just had a backpack and a big smile, kind of. And the Egyptian guy looked at me and he said, "Papers." And I said, "I'm collecting them in Israel at the South African embassies." I said, "Paperwork." Like whatever. And he got into a whole, this guy's a problem immediately. And they just kind of shoved me off to the side of the building on the one side there. And I just sat there for a while. And I could see from the demeanor that they weren't going to actually be amicable in any way. They weren't going to try and speak English to me. They weren't going to try and hear my story. For them, it was like bureaucrats, and they didn't have time to deal with problems. So I sat there and I realized the day is getting hot and it's moving on. And I decided, okay, I'm going to go to Dahab and see if I can get to Dahab. And I had a bottle of water, my shoes, a bag, and I think that was pretty much it.
Mm-hmm.
And I started on this.
For us Americans, 16 kilometers, about 12 miles, 10 miles.
Okay, for a kilometer is 1,000 meters. 1,000 meters is 300 yards. Right? It's like 330 yards. So it's like 333 times 16. Yeah. It's a couple of miles. It's serious miles. And I started walking out onto this playa, realizing that I had to stay along the coastline of the Red Sea. But the terrain didn't allow me to stay close to the shoreline like I thought. And the first obstacle was these big rocks. And I started mooring out into the desert, thinking I was going in the right direction. Then I started walking. And I walked for, I don't know, good 2.5 hours before I realized I'm like in the middle of buttfuck nowhere. And I started to look around and get my bearing. And I realized because of the glare in the desert, the mirage had kind of trapped me in a position where I could only see about a kilometer in any direction. And then everything kind of phased off into a haze. And I was like, okay. And then I looked at where the sun was and I saw my shadow, and it's getting close to 12 o'clock. So I've got mostly no shadow. So I took a heading and I thought that's heading is east because I'm sticking east so I can get to the Red Sea. And I carried on walking for another, I don't know, another hour and a bit. And then I stopped and I was really getting delirious. So I started drinking a little bit of water, but I realized I couldn't drink a lot of water. And I kind of sat down and I was like, I was lost for bearing. And I don't know. You know, you have those quiet moments when you just want to like scream, and there's another moments where you just want to kick yourself for being an idiot and trusting, and all those kind of things go through your mind in those funny places. And sometimes
Yeah.
you just, I'm sitting there kind of like really feeling the heat and the exhaustion, and got to that point where I feel like I'm starting to panic, and my body's telling me, calm down, calm down. So I take a breath and I kind of stand up. And as I stand up, the weirdest thing happens to me. Just above the mirage, off in the distance it's like I'm seeing this hallucination, and it's the weirdest kind of thing where you actually have to take your eyes and look into the mirage. And what I first saw was this little head come up, and then it was a little body, and there was a little guy, and then the little guy's hand came up, and he was ushering me over, like, come this way. And that's the only thing I could see in this haze. And he had like a green turban on. And I was like, okay. And then I looked again, and he was still standing there, and he was ushering me that way. So I kind of like took a breath, had a sip of water, picked up my shit, and started heading in that direction. And delusion does set in. I think sometimes.
So
You
just to get a sense of to get a sense of the heat, can you put a number to like about how hot it was?
In the Sinai Peninsula, in the average morning, it gets up to, I'd say in American terms, it would get up to your early 20s, 30s, which is that's South African, which is American, is Fahrenheit. That's like about 60 degrees in the morning.
Yeah.
And then by about 9 o'clock, it's I'd say it's well up to maybe 100. And about 12 o'clock, it's like over 100, and you can get dehydrated very quickly. A lot of things can happen very quickly if you're not paying attention. And yes, keeping a cool head is one of those things.
Yeah. Hence the turban on the man with the green turban popping up out of the mirage.
It's pretty much it, you know. And not knowing if you're losing your mind or anything, you carry on walking, and another 2 hours go by, and the sun is way over your shoulder now, and you kind of get to the point that you feel like you're losing your bearing. And I don't know, same thing happened. I was like looking off and trying to make sure I wasn't lost, and again, off to the side of me appeared this little guy, and he was standing there with a big smile on his face, and he looked a little bit bigger, but he was still a small little guy, like really small to me. And he just kind of waved. He was like, "You're going the right way. Don't worry. Keep going." And I was like, "Fuck, he's far away," you know, kind of thing. And then you walk, and you walk, and late afternoon's getting there, and I'm getting up to this dune, and this dune is just taking it over, and I'm leaning off to the left of me, and it kind of heads me back to the Red Sea. For the first time, I actually see water, and I'm kind of relieved because, you know, I can actually do something with water. I can cool off, I can find some fish, I can do stuff with it, so I'm not totally fucked. But the funniest thing is, as I start walking up on this ridge, right above me, in the shadow of the mountain, was this massive Bedouin tent, pitch black, about 3 inches thick, with poles all the way up under it, and a big Persian rug under it. And at the front of the entrance was another little Persian rug with some cushions, a samovar, which is like a sun teapot to make sun tea with, and there was a chessboard, and there was a little guy, and he must have been about 4'8". He was a serious little looking Bedouin. He had the most amazing face. When I looked at it, it just had such character in it when you looked at it. And he had these eyes, and he just had a big smile on his face. And he kind of was standing up on the ridge in front of me, and he was just ushering me over, like, I've been waiting for you all day. So I kind of climbed this little hill and looked around, and he kind of was sitting down, and he put his hand on the floor and patted it like, sit the fuck down. So I sat down, and he kind of gave me a moment, and I was looking around, and he poured me some tea, and he just stood and looked at me. And it was kind of like this moment where he was actually amazed that I wasn't a figment of his imagination, and I was amazed that he wasn't a figment of my imagination. It was like, this is cool. But not a word from him again. And I sat there for about 15 minutes again, and he pointed at the chessboard, and we started playing chess, and the day just kind of flew by.
Well, the question is, who moved first?
Actually, the first game I did.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember I did do the first move.
Was he a good chess player?
Oh, man. I've never been so schooled. And I thought it was good, because I played chess through most of my life. Even my brother, we had a mass competition, but just
it was like playing chess against Yelta.
It was like Yoda. It was almost like I was attacking him here, and he was spanking my ass, and I tried to defend myself, and the game was over, and then we played again. And it didn't matter what I did. He was the most partisan player I've ever seen. He was like behind a rock, hitting you, coming around the corner, slicing you this way. He just annihilated me on the chessboard. And it was just really, like a really enjoyable day. And it kind of like, it didn't get to me. You lose sense of time, what's happening. You don't know the people, you haven't spoken. Lots of things have happened. And while we were playing chess, his family had made us dinner. And in the packing up of the board and putting everything away, these three sons appeared, very young. They were all in 8 to 16 range. And they sat down on the side of this table, which was a carpet. And the carpet had a big brass plate on it. And then the woman came in, and she didn't look at me, but she put certain things down and put down the food and then left. And then they invited me to sit down and invited me to start. So I said, praised them and said, thank you very much for hosting me. Thank you for taking me in for this night, and thank you for feeding me. And they were very appreciative. We had a really quiet evening. We ate the food. It was really tasty. And after dinner, they just kind of disappeared from the tent and left the light on, a candle burning in the corner, and closed up the tent and let me fall asleep in the tent.
Did you guys have a common language?
Nope. I didn't say anything that evening. It was just gestures and nods. And it was kind of like, you don't know what to do. So in the morning, I kind of woke up, and I realized, because I had been tending fire for hours, I had fallen asleep. I was waiting for them to come back in, but they disappeared after dinner and left me have this whole tent. And it's amazing, people's honesty out there and how they treat you. It's really simple, but it's gracious in such a way, you get entrusted with everything. Mm-hmm. And I woke up in the morning, kind of had a little moment, and I was sitting there, and the son gave me a bowl of it looked like fried rice and eggs. And I was nibbling on that, and this Bedouin appeared and said, Muhammad is coming. And I was like, okay. So I was like, okay, who's Muhammad? So I was like, okay. So I just kind of hung out. And in the process of waiting, this young man approached, and he kind of looked at me and looked at his father, and he had this smile on his face, and he greeted me in English, and he was like, my father says that you are his gracious guest, and I must treat you well. And I said, I don't know how I've got this on. And he said, no, it's a Bedouin custom. If you walk across the desert and you get taken in, it's a custom. Nobody will let you starve in the desert. I was like, wow, that's a Bedouin custom. He said, yes, we always look out for wandering travelers, like we never know who is going to be the next prophet or that kind of thing. So he was very mystical about his approach. And he said, my father says that you must come and help me. So I said, okay, what can I do? He says, well, I'm running a hostel. So I kind of, within 24 hours of getting fucked up again, I had a job running a hostel, and I was painting it and painting landscapes and decorating the walls. And I got kind of involved there. And next minute, I met his other brother. And his other brother had a hotel restaurant kind of thing. He had like a Bedouin tent in the back where backpackers could rent a night to sleep. And then he had a little kitchen where he prepped food in front of the Red Sea under a palm tree. It wasn't very fancy. It was very simple. But in my painting and my things, I painted them a sign. I painted it. It was called the Laughing Buddha. And I painted them a nice Buddha and a big smile and a big stomach. And I painted and put all these palm trees around and set up carpets with all these cushions. And
so this is in like a Bedouin encampment, or is this in a town? Like
this
in
is actually
Western
Dahab. Dahab was a nomadic state. It has no police. There's so much that happens in nomadic states. If you commit adultery, you can get stoned. If you steal, they'll cut off your hand. If you blaspheme, they will do anything from beat you. If you commit a petty crime, you don't go to a prison like in America. No. Egypt's got the best kind of crime. I went into the police station because I had to register when I was there. And when I went in, it was this metal cage in the middle of the police box station. It was a square building with a square box in the middle with a metal gate. And it had these weird railings that were thin and they went up to about 2 meters, and they had a square on the top, but you could literally stick your hand in the side, but you couldn't get through the bars. They weren't wide enough for you to stick in. And on the side of the wall are these bamboo sticks. Now, this is the rule. Anybody that goes into the police station, if they've got a beef with you or not, they don't like you, they can pick up a stick and beat you as long as they're not in the box beating you. And anybody can do it. It's like public justice. And then after they think you've deserved your fitted your crime, punishment is served, they'll let you go. But they don't lock you up. They don't feed you. And if you're there for more than a couple of days, it could be pretty detrimental to your physical body. So when I went there, I had to get a little visa to stay there. And they didn't mind. They said you could stay up to 6 months again. So I started working at this little restaurant, running the hostel. And because I spoke English, I could get more tourists there because I could just talk to them as they arrived. And it was very handy. I could tell them what they could find, where they could find it, how they could rent it, and without having me not speak English. So it was kind of like I was
you were a
ambassador.
Bridge. Yeah.
Kind of, yeah. So in cultures, I can understand how your language gets used and the Bedouins benefit, but they never paid me. It's not the way they do things. They just kind of trade. And if you ask for something, they just give it to you. So it's a very open, trusting community in that way. So if I wanted paints, I'd go to the Bedouin market and they'd buy me paints. If I wanted to get new brushes, they'd give me brushes. If I wanted to make something different on their restaurant menu, I'd tell them what to buy and they'd get it. So it was really nice. And I kind of got into a rut where, you just accept that's what you're doing and you just go about your way. and you don't really think how you're going to get across the border, and time kind of slips away again. And just like that, one day I was working in the restaurant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go for it. Oh, I was.
What you want to say?
I seem to have a recollection of you teaching some English there as well.
Yeah, I worked in a jewelry shop. I was carving and carving a lot of things there. And when I worked in the jewelry shop, because a lot of people liked the way I carved, I'd literally scribe things from Allah to little tourists that want me to carve an ice skate or something silly like a person's name. But in the general community, people would call on me and ask them to read things or just translate something, words they wouldn't understand. They'd say, what would this mean? And then I'd actually have to take time to understand what the word because they wouldn't understand what the word meant. And that would come across quite a lot. But in general, I think people were just curious, like, you're from Africa. Why are you here? I got a lot of that. So yeah. English was like a bridge in a lot of ways, but it also gave me a clear way of meeting people and having a discussion without having some kind of conditions, just an open discussion. People are very generous that way. And I really didn't know how the fuck I was going to get out of Egypt, Sinai, get my passport or anything. And time just flies away. And before you realize it, I think it had been almost, again, 7-8 months. And one morning I woke up and I went to the restaurant to go and make breakfast. And when I got there was a army jeep with two guys in surfboards and jeans and like shorts and whatever, like they were going to the beach. But they had an army jeep. Yeah. So I kind of talked to them, and they said, who are you? And I told them, I'm Nicholas McDonald, da-da-da. They said, you don't look like you're better. And I'm like, no. They're like, what you doing here? And I told them my story, and they're like, okay. So how long have you been in this country? I said, about 8 months now almost. And they said, well, you're going to be here today. And while we're here, if you want to lift back to the border, we can take you through the Israeli border. And I was like, huh? And they were like, we are military police and we've got the day off. And we're going to rent some paddlers, go on the Red Sea, do some fishing, drink a little bit, smoke a little bit. At the end of the day, we're going to jump in our Jeep before we start our night shift and we're going to go through the border. If you want a lift, we'll give you a lift to the South African embassy. We can do that for you. Wow, fuck yeah. In like 5 minutes again, after being patient for so long, I literally grabbed my shirt, said bye to everybody, thanked the family, and within half an hour, end of the day came. These guys came back. They put me in the Jeep. And when we started riding, they said, hey, man, can you do us a favor? And I was like, sure, whatever. I said, well, we're on duty. We can't buy duty free. But if you go through duty free for us, you can buy us alcohol and we'll get you through the border then. They said, okay, cool. I said, how am I going to get through the Egyptian side? They said, no, just chill out. We'll do the talking for you. I said, okay, cool. And then we drove and we get to the police area just before the border. And they stop the Jeep for a second and he turns around and quickly whips out some handcuffs and puts me in handcuffs. And I'm like, what the fuck? And he says, don't worry, don't worry, we got you, this is how you must go through. I was like, okay, whatever the fuck, it's Israelis, it's like half militant and it's almost like Italian mafia with a gun, it's just a little bit more serious. So they drove up to the first building and the guy walked in there with his MP papers and he pointed at me and he blah, 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 blah. And then they drove up to the gates and he came over and kind of like opened the gates and he climbed out and he let me took my handcuffs off and he walked me over to the duty-free section. And he gave me a couple of $100 and said, get us some vodka and some brandy and some of this. So I drink and smokes and shit and get out the other side. I put it in my little bag and I jump back in the Jeep. And I'm sitting there again. Then they're like, they put the handcuffs back on me. And I'm sitting like, yeah, these fucking Israelis. But don't worry, it's protocol. Kind of like chill. And then they drive up to this barricade, and you're driving through this zigzag of barricades with machine guns on either side and people on duty, and you're going through the Israeli side. And these guys just get to the other side and kind of like nod at this guy, put their hand up, and they just drive through. And I'm shitting the whole way through. And then they drive down the road to the South African embassy. And deja vu. Deja vu is the next one. I mean, like, sometimes you have things happen to you and you feel like you're a fool. You don't know it's happened before, whatever. But I get out the Jeep and I go up to this building that's got a staircase, and there's somebody standing outside the front of the building smoking a cigarette. And it says the South African Embassy on a little board where the person's standing. So I have a big sigh of relief, and I walk up to the guy and I ask him for a cigarette. And he hands me a cigarette. And I start smoking. And he looks at me like he knows me. It's like it's a haunting, like. And he says, you look familiar. And it's like, I don't know, where you from? And we start talking like Rudderpoort, like Krugersdorp, like what school you went to, agricultural college. We're just trying to figure out where we know each other from. And he says, no. I've never been to any of those places. I'm from like Free State or something. But he says, you know, it's like I've seen your face every day. And he's like, this is what you have for. I said, I'm here to pick up a passport. Hopefully there's one for me. I've been stuck in Egypt for a year and a half almost, and I'm trying to see if I've got a passport. He says, I think I know who you are. And
you're back now. You dropped off a little bit. So
what happened?
Your signal dropped out a little bit. So
could be it's just getting late.
Yeah, no worries.
So he kind of like he ushers me into the building and he says, come with me, So I'm following him. We're just walking past people. I'm not really paying attention. We get to his desk and he's looking around his desk. And on the one side of his desk, he's got this pile of folders. And on the top folder is a name. And the name just happens to be my name. And I see it, like just on the corner of the folder. And I just like, Nicholas Vernon. And he's like, yes. Yeah, I know that name. And he opens it. He says, you're the biggest question we've had here because you've been missing for over a year and a half. And I was just about to send this passport back to South Africa. And I was like, oh, fuck. You mean he's like, literally you had about 2 weeks and we're going to give up on you. So I was like, it was unbelievable. I couldn't believe I had got my passport, met this guy, gone through this whole journey. And again, I was back in Israel trying to figure out where to go next. And it's like so much happens in 24 hours again. I booked into a hostel. And this guy was a really genuine guy, Kobe. He ran a hostel. He said I could work at the hostel. So I got a job working at the hostel. And then I started working in a metal yard. And then I got another job working in the Chavat-Ayayin, the ostrich farm. And it was like a holiday resort in just before the Gaza Strip, along the Red Sea, where they had, again, a Bedouin theme train in a wadi where we watched everything from light shows every night. And I started working a kitchen, and things just progressed. Over time,
Can I ask you a question?
I got a.
How does the ostrich farm tie in with the resort part of it?
Well, that's the thing is they used to have these buses, tour buses come through from all over Israel. But global, they would come in and then they get on a tour bus and go through a guide. And then the guide at the ostrich farm was basically a Bedouin nomadic theme. So the buses would come in and we cook up Bedouin rice, eggs with all the spices, do this shish kebabs, hummus, and all the things. Top make all these traditional nomadic foods. And then the Bedouins would come in on camels in the evening when the tourists were ready to eat. And they would bring in the belly dancers. And then there would be a belly dance show. And the whole farm resort had animals, farm animals, ostriches, as well as you could parachute in or ride a quad bike down, or you could do other things in there, as well as they would have a light show every night to entertain the crowd during the belly dance events. So that was one of the restaurants that I enjoyed working at. And it was a lot of fun, you know. Things happen, life changes. I think that was like a good part for me to be in, but it was like running a hostel, working a job, and you know, so many things happen. Eventually, I got a visa to England. I worked in England for a year and a half on construction and demolition.
Where'd you land in England?
Well, that was what happened was while I was working at the hostel, I got some friends. After a couple of months, they were returning back to England. They said I should come with. So I booked a ticket with this girlfriend at the time. Her name was Mary, and she booked into a hotel with me with my money. And then she decided to go home, which was Italy. So she caught a train back home and left me in a hotel. And I was so screwed. I didn't know what to do when I was in England there first. And something amazing happened. You know, it's like chance encounters, things that happen to you that you never think of, but when they come about. So while I was in Sinai and running this hostel and restaurant, I was privy to different people from around the world, and some just kind of stood out. And I met a group of Australians, Brendan, Rick, Matt, and Brad. And these guys were from Australia, and they were in the Sinai, and they were there for 2 weeks. And I remember giving them a whole lot of weed and feeding them, and they were staying at our hostel. But when they left, I didn't get their phone numbers or anything, and I didn't think I was ever going to Australia. So it's kind of like off they went, and I was still stuck in Egypt. When I finally got to England, about a year and a half later, I was actually in this hotel thinking I've got to get a job immediately because I can't afford England so bloody expensive. I don't know how the fuck I'm going to survive. And so I went and I read this magazine called the TNT magazine, and it basically told me that for $5 you can get an English breakfast and a cup of coffee at this builder's cafe. So I went in and I ordered me a breakfast, and I was kind of sitting at this table looking at this guy, and I did recognize his face. And he just kind of said, "Hey, mate." And he had an Aussie accent. And I didn't click, you know? And I was like, "How do I know you?" And he was like, my name's Brendan. I'm from New Zealand. I was like, I thought you were from Australia. He said, no, that's Rick. Rick's from Australia. I was like, oh. He says, how do you know Rick? And I was like, man, I know you. I'm trying to figure this out. And he says, you're the guy from Egypt. Nick, you're the guy from Egypt. And I said, yeah. He says, man, you won't believe me. Here in Clapham Junction, we have rented a house, and my mates are all in the same house. And those guys that went to Sinai all are in this house. And I'll take you there like after breakfast. And I was like, no shitting way. So literally, I followed Brendan. We go to catch a train, get to Clapham Junction, and he opens this door, and we go up to the first story, and there's the kitchen and the bathroom. Then you go up to the next story, and then there's the living room and a bedroom. And inside the first living room is Rick, Matt, and Brad, and Brendan. And then I meet some other crazy South Africans that are in the house, and the first thing we decide to do is braai, and it's snowing outside. So we had the local police yelling at us about, we told them, we're not making a fire, we're trying to fucking braai. And it was kind of funny. We had a great time with Australians.
Like a barbecue?
Yeah, we were kind of barbecuing on the front, on the first story of this, in the middle of this, I don't know, it's like London is built and there's no real gardens, and everybody that has a garden, we had like a little yard at the back that you could basically stand in and smoke a cigarette. They don't really have gardens. And then the building was 4 stories tall, so there were multiple rooms and multiple bathrooms, but it was just like a dormitory. And it was great fun. I got a job, and kind of things just kept happening for me no matter where I went. I worked in England for a year and a half, and I made some more money again. And then it kind of like, it gave me a chance to get a visa a study visa to come to America. And I applied, and I arrived in San Francisco. And that's when all hell broke loose for me, because the people I knew in San Francisco, family and friends, the friend was a girlfriend, and the girlfriend had another boyfriend. So it didn't want to, I was like, hey, it's not going to work. So then I went to go and find my cousin, and I haven't seen my cousin since I was a little kid. I was maybe 14 the last time I saw my cousin Terrence, and he lived in Corte Madera. And I just managed to find him. I met him at a local pub, and next minute I met my cousin for the first time since I was 14. And then he basically explained to me that I couldn't stay with him because my grandfather, or my uncle, his father, had been staying with him for the last year, and they'd just gone back to South Africa. And he said he had a solution that I should hook up with some South Africans that fixed boats. And that's how I ended up in Berkeley, California, in the marina there, fixing historical boats with Dion and Werner. And it was the Dutch boat building company that we started. And we restored some amazing historical boats, all of them teak. We did some fiberglass, mast, you name it, steel prepping, deconstruction. I think the one boat, I deconstructed it from stem to stern, from top to hull, under the boat. Yeah. I replaced the rudder.
For people listening, just give a visual representation of those two characters, Dion and Vern.
Okay, so when I traveled the world, I've met many South Africans, and sometimes you meet South Africans in other countries, but they're not South African. First, Dion and Werner van Wyk are here from Cape Town. When I met them in California, they would only speak Afrikaans to me. To most Americans, they would think that they were speaking Nordic Viking or something. And they were so disrespectful to me, and they'd always talk to me like I was an idiot because I refused to speak English. So there is this Afrikaans English hatred, but I don't take it personally. I just find it kind of petty and silly sometimes. But Dion, to give you a representation of how this man looked, he rode a bike with me, a racing bike, a Centurion. And if I'm 6'2", and I'm 100, like 100 kilograms or whatever, Dion is 7'2", that's 7'2". He has dreadlocks, he's blonde, blue eyes, and he has a long beard. He looks like
not just dreadlocks like down to his butt.
He has dreadlocks down to his butt. But the thing that Dion loved to do is take this long turban and go from the top of his head up and tie his dreadlocks another foot above his head so they could dangle over his face. So he was looked to most people over 8 feet with this crown. And his brother Werner was 6'8". I'm 6'2". He's still a good 6 inches taller than me. And his shoulder width, I think he's about another half a body wider than me. He was 6'8" and stocky like a Viking pirate. Werner was more coarse. He didn't have pleasantries.
Put it lightly.
he was a blunt axe. If he could tell you were stupid, he would tell you. If he could tell you were an idiot, he would. And he'd rival and revel in the joy of telling you you're stupid. But if you did something amazing, he would not say a word. He wouldn't say you're clever. He wouldn't say that you're brilliant. He wouldn't say, I would have done this. He wouldn't ever compete with you. He would just tell you, ek sou dit so doen. Meaning, I do it this way instead, because it's my way. So he always had to disagree. And he was a tough person to work for. The project that we took on when we actually when I arrived in 1994 in California was a German ketch. The boat was 48 feet long with a bowsprit, a mast and a mizzen, which is 2 masts. And then it had a beam, which is the width of the boat is 22 feet. And it was 28 feet deep. And the lead shoe on the bottom of it was about 12 to 14 tons of lead. It was solid babinga and apaton, which is a type of teak. And when I got the boat, it had been standing in a drug hall for over 20 years, and the owner hadn't done very much maintenance or work on it. So it was a beautiful boat, but it was really destroyed. And I've got some really good photos of it. I'll look for them and I'll send you a photo of them so you can post it later. But the boat itself was in such a bad condition that we actually spent a year deconstructing it during El Nino. And during one of the storms, a pier, and I mean a full pier, a 60-foot, 6-foot wide floating dock in the middle of Berkeley Marina in one of the El Nino storms, broke off and floated away. And me and Dion got on some small little boats, and we steered it for about 5 hours until we could dock it on the flank side of our boat, which gave us an island which was independent. The Berkeley Marina did not own it, so they didn't realize this for quite a while. So while we deconstructed the inside of the boat, we packed it on. They thought there. And after getting everything deconstructed after 6 months of ripping the whole inside and cutting out parts and replacing and doing patches and figuring out how to get around things. We got it to the raw hole inside, where I basically was stuck packing and unpacking and transporting with Dion everything from the inside onto this floating dock. And while we were there, I met Chris Pendergraft from the Vulcan Foundry, and he got us involved with Laser, who appeared as well at one of these crazy parties.
Describe the Vulcan for us, that mishmash of of whatever it is.
I don't know how to start the story. It has to all start with me sitting on the boat and this guy, Laser, Mr. Tom Finley, as we could say, the metaphysical wizard, the DJ from outer space, the kinetic and the electric. And if I have to think of all the things that encompass Laser, from all the dried sticks, flower arrangements, and all the things that he does, he is a cosmic wizard. He arrived one day in his bus, came down the dock, and basically said to me, "You can't stay on the boat all the time. You should come with me. There's this place that's getting started." I was like, okay. And the Vulcan Foundry at that point was 4401 San Leandro, was a ball bearing factory from the Second World War that was decommissioned. And it had a mass of steel and garbage on the inside of it. The warehouse was so big, it is now one of the most amazing collectives on the world. And so much has happened because of it. Burning Man and all the people that are responsible. And I just happened to be one of those people that were just pulled in by the cosmic wizard at the right moment. Laser picked me up from the boats one day when I was tired. And he just said, "You got to get out and get off the boat and do something and meet some people." So there was a party at the Vulcan, which was basically, it wasn't a party. It was a whole lot of guys had come together, and they asked if we understood how to deconstruct things without getting hurt. And we were like, And they said, "Anything that you take off the building, we can salvage. So be careful." And we were like, But then we walked through these open spaces, and to explain it it was an open vault of mass machinery that we started to deconstruct. Piece by piece, it was sold off and materials were bought. Wood was assembled, sheetrock. And then these guys started to locate and allocate spaces of 4,000 square feet, which was basically 4,000 square foot, 4 stories high. And they divided the Vulcan Foundry up into 115 spaces, including a laundromat, a Thai cafe, and an art gallery, a Vespa collective, a pottery, some of the most amazing potters. We got some of the most amazing people from Tabla Rasa, Dubai, Barbek, and all the people from Ali Akbar Khan. And then we had all these other collectives like Chris Radcliffe and Chris Radcliffe, all these people.
I'm going to inform you of something right now since we're on that subject. Chris Radcliffe, one of the cornerstones of American underbelly, passed recently.
You kidding?
No. No. For everybody out there who may or may not know who Chris Radcliffe was, he was one of the people responsible for the Cacophony Society. He was one of the founders and instrumental people in the underculture of Burning Man, and helped start that whole institution. An artist and a freak and a lovely guy, one of the best storytellers I've ever known.
What I must say about him is he had the bowling park. He took over Portland. Yeah, I remember we built the sculpture, the Lilith sculpture at the country fair. And it ended up in Chris's Park up in Portland in an apple tree where he took purple glass bottles and hung them in the tree with Lilith going up the middle of the tree because we had to cut off in the middle. And I remember hanging out with him where we could talk about anything from explosions, pop culture. He was the most compassionate guy. Would give his time to community. He started so many different workshops, community efforts. We have green spaces in Portland because of him. We have collectives all over California where he was I would say, if it wasn't for him, most of us would have never got off our arse and believed we could do anything. And that's the truth. He gave us the ability to not question. He gave us the ability to reason with police. He gave us the ability to have social parties where we took responsibility, had our own security, checked in everything, what was happening. Anything could happen from a drug overdose, and we could handle anything at our parties in the collective. And it was one of the most amazing things with the Vulcan from the renovation and the building of the space. The collective used to go down to Golden Beach and create a driftwood and just a party of sorts. It was like when we weren't fucking doing shit, people would go to different places. There's a place out in Berkeley Marina, out on the point there, which is also a grunge recycled yard where a lot of us artists went and created sculptures and just left it for the public. But not a lot of people knew about these spaces, and not a lot of people knew where to find or how to get there. And I would find them just riding my bikes. People tell me about it, and I'd ride from Berkeley to Oakland to, I'd go to San Francisco with my bike, get the BART, go into the BART, come back. And I was able to just be fluid. There were different places and different collectives in San Francisco. One of my favorites
popping around that time
was CCC, and Laser was part of that collective. And then we met other tribes, Red Door in the Haight-Ashbury. And then in San Francisco, there must have been 30, 40 different collectives where I ended up working for D7, Dimension 7. And they did a lot of the special effects for Burning Man. Mm-hmm. And I did a couple of sculptures for them, some massive sculptures, which were just for the universe. And that's what I loved about Chris, like working at these random intervals. I'd end up in Portland and I'd just hang out for a day there, and it would be awesome. Community action, workshops would happen. I'd always get informed of things happening, even though I wasn't connected to anything. That's what I loved about it. It was just such an inclusive community. Mm-hmm. And so much happened from it. And I think one of my favorites was Chris, out of all the people, he had such a childish seriousness about him. Like, don't fuck with me. I mean, we're making a fire, fuckhead. And whatever it would be, if we're going to make alcohol, or we're going to have a little bomb, or he's going to blow up something, or whatever it was, we knew he had it organized. He had it under control. And with that kind of superiority in just patience with idiots and patience with the whole collective of everybody that would come along. And it kind of led me to Burning Man, where I started to do sculptures. And it all started with working for D7, Dimension 7, where he worked in their workshop warehouse just under the San Francisco Bridge, where we built a spaceship. Where I remember me and Dion building this spaceship that was 60 foot around, 2 stories high, where I spent 4 days laminating chocolate mylar paper onto it. The whole thing was constructed in frames at a solid square center, which had a drop zone that you could walk up into the DJ booth. And when we built this thing, it was so amazing that it was like a party that didn't want to stop. It started playing music the second we started nailing it together. And by the time we had finished nailing it, the party went on for the whole of Burning Man. And at the last minute of Burning Man, it was almost like watching World War III. The scene for me at Burning Man and the playa and the people and the collectives and all the different mindsets and all the different postures and possibilities. I would have to pick the one collective that was over the top. And I never experienced so much fun and laughter. I enjoyed taking some LSD and really enjoying the playa and experiencing it. But while I was there, observing the nuclear zone that I had built, was when the Burning Man was ending, they decided to burn the spaceship. So we removed all the equipment out of it, and they were playing the DJ set from the RV. And then they lit this sculpture, which was, in my mind, the most spectacular and horrifying thing I've ever seen in the world. It was a trail flame about 2 miles long. And it was this purple, green, licking flame that had this color that I've never seen on any kind of wood in my life. And
Well,
this thing took over the fire.
So for those who might
was
not
like-
know how myelinated plastic is made, it's actually
Oh,
heavy metals that
man.
are fumed onto the plastic substrate.
Yeah,
And so what you're likely seeing was all of those heavy metals.
yeah, that's
Going up.
true. It was like almost
Beautiful.
psychedelic, just watching the fire burn for over, must have been almost an hour in a way. But it was the most surreal thing to watch happen, where you build something and you give it to the universe, and you know it only has one purpose in this world. And that's what I love about art. If you can give it away, nobody can possess it. And there's so much power in that. And sometimes we forget, we make things to last so people might remember us. But I think people like Chris, we were deliberate in that way that if you didn't know us, there was a reason for it. You had to be at the core group of it. You had to be part of that eruption to experience it.
You had to
You
be
had
part
to
of
be
the art, part of the process.
exactly. There was no maybe tomorrow I'll come up. No. I had to give up. Like, I stopped working on the boat and fucked off for a week or a month, and nobody could complain or say anything to me. And that was what I enjoyed about the boats. It gave me freedom to work in the collectives, to have a life outside of what I did. But it also gave me a family of multiple people around the world. And some of the most striking people are not the people you expect. It's usually the people watching you from the sideline, laughing at you, like Chris. He would have such a fun sense of humor, where he could sit and laugh at you and laugh with you in such a way that you would feel like the hero at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And
It empower people to action.
Yeah, he had an amazing spirit to make us cry with laughter. And I thank him wherever he is. He has been an inspiring spirit. And the people I've met through all the different collectives, I've started quite a few. I remember after the Vulcan, I started at number 52 with Chris and Steve Rademacher and Brad and Matt and Tig. And, those were the beginnings of some of the most amazing parties, because I remember the first week I met them was chaos. I walked into their warehouse at 52, and their first story, they had been salvaging material for quite a while. And it was almost, to the ceiling where you couldn't walk in. You had to walk through these little paths up to the first floor where we sat on couches and smoked weed and drank beer and laughed and fell asleep. And that was like the end of our day. But sometime in the middle of the night, I kind of fucked up. I had to go for a pee. And in my ADHD and moments, I went down the staircase and kind of something got hooked on me and collapsed the material around me. So in the middle of the night, in the middle of the dark, after having a serious pee, I started packing and organizing windows and doors and slates and frames and pool tables and music equipment. And by the early morning, I had stacked up 60 doors, 100 windows, 20 frames, built a stage, set up speakers, not knowing everybody's still sleeping upstairs. I was just, this belongs here, kind of, that belongs there. And by removing all the rubbish, I packed the pool table clear and cleared up the whole area around the space. But literally, I had made a stage with 80% of the material, and everything else was stacked between walls, under staircases, and along the main backspace wall.
Mhm.
And then we set up a cargo net, and Chris decided to throw a party that night. And I was the hero of the party, because the day before, it was like nobody could actually walk in the space.
Uh-huh.
So I enjoyed the Vulcan. I affected a lot of different spaces. Katie and Bubai were the next, and I did them a stage so they could do tabla rasa. And there was Dolores in her cafe, where she became my girlfriend, and I went to Detroit for that. And then I came back. So she was also an amazing lady at the Vulcan.
Yep.
But when I came back from Detroit, I hooked up with 52, and 6 of us guys started Mother's Night.
Yeah, before we get to
And-
Mother's Night, Nick,
Okay.
because the Vulcan, in a sense, is a rather interesting American phenomena for that period of time. It set the stage for
Yes.
things like Mother's Nine and all the other things that were happening there,
Yes.
and all the way through to what most people know, Ghost Ship, and the change that happened through that.
Yeah.
So, give an overview of what happened at the Vulcan with its multiple different compartmental studios and spaces and people, just to give people a sense of how that affected that scene.
Well, okay. When I arrived in San Leandro, most of us didn't have money, and we were pretty homeless to squat a building. And most of us started out with a bucky or a pickup truck, and we would go to job sites and salvage everything we could find. And it was amazing what we could find in the beginning, because we started out finding 2x4s and then sheetrock, and then I'd find buckets of mud and just things that were not used on site because they were clearing up site. We would get there and start clearing it out. And because we're in San Leandro, there was a lot of Mexican works communities where you could literally go to the dumpster while they were wrecking a building and start clearing the dumpster out. And they were like, thank you. Take what you can, because they could fit more in the dumpster. So we'd load the pickups and take them back to the Vulcans. And we'd work through the day. We'd find something, we'd jump in a pickup, and we'd go here and go there. And by the end of the day, we'd be so tired. A lot of times we'd just take the little bit of money that we had, and we'd walk across under the BART, across the freeway, or under the freeway, to this little Mexican place. It was Zamarana. And at that point, it was a little truck that these guys made burritos. And it was like most amazing burrito. It was as long as my arm.
They're still making them. I had one last year.
Are you kidding? And we used to go down there with like $5, and we could get a burrito and a little cerveza or a little pop. And the burritos were like $3, and it was kind of amazing because you couldn't eat the whole thing. And it had everything: beef, chicken. You could get whatever you want. Some of the most nice rice with beans. You get cilantro and the salsa, guacamole, cream cheese, and then on top of it, you could still have your chili, and they'd make the green salsa, the red salsa, or you could get Christmas if you sat down, which was the two different chilies on the plate. But we would like literally eat a burrito. When I was at the Vulcan, every day we had something or worked or did something in the community. We'd all go down at the end of the day to this Mexican restaurant. And over the time, it started out as a little Mexican wagon. Basically, he bought the space, the parking lot, and developed the restaurant. And then he got 2 more trucks, and he became so popular. It was like became like a family restaurant for all the local communities, and all the people in the Vulcan would buy from them. And it created this amazing connection between different cultures in Oakland, from African American to Mexican, Hispanic to people from Cuba. And just the most of the people were very accepting of this mismatched group of homeless people taking over their neighborhood by squatting. And the generosity, sometimes, I mean, I'd ask him for an extra salsa or whatever. He was always such a nice, generous guy. And it's amazing. He's still, to this day, I think, still one of my favorite burritos I ever had in Oakland was from there. And the place, the community, I remember at one point I started doing little knickknacks and landscaping and hard work and working with Stephen Rademacher, doing anything, just building a room, leveling a floor, building a staircase in San Francisco, throwing a concrete slab, whatever needed to be done. And I never really planned any of it. It just kind of happened daily. Every part of the community was active. So for me, what I loved about San Leandro was seeing that building from the outside street. You could drive by that building a million times and you'd have no clue as to what's going on inside. And the people that actually live there, that know its family and know its community, wherever they are in this world. It's amazing how many of them have carried the spirit and started more communities. And I mean, Justin, one of my friends, started Back Alley Vessel there in Oakland. And that was also a renegade building. We had so many strange collectives that started. And I ended up in Oakland on MLK and 46th and MLK at one point, in the building behind the Black Panthers headquarters, where I lived in this little.
From there.
Yeah, I know. And that building was like amazing because had no permits or anything. I jacked the whole building up and re-poured the foundation for the owner, and he was trading me to live there. And then I started growing with some friends there, and it was just the most amazing collective because on the one side of the street, I had all this history of the Black Panthers, and coming home, my first few months there was, nobody realized who I was. And when finally somebody did realize, I thought I was going to get shot. One of my
That was
friends.
the Black Muslim Bakery.
No, that's actually the other side. Oh, that's even more.
Yeah,
That's another story. But it's like I remember Al sitting on his porch.
That's on San Pablo.
No, that was MLK in 46.
Well, no, but the Black Muslim Bakery is a whole other side thing. But
Well,
back to
the thing is,
Mother's Nine
yeah,
and how the Vulcan. So to me, like the Vulcan set the stage for all this by being this mishmash of compartments of different arts, and
yeah.
like you go into one and it's like this overflow of one person's
Well,
aesthetic and
that
into
was
another,
the
and it's like
thing. The Vulcan, I don't think I understood how it operated in this universe because on the laws of chaos, you put out what you want in the world, and everything comes back to you. That was the basic theory of it. So everybody in the space knew somebody, and we started telling people, and like minded people came in. And it was funny. Some people were homeless. We took kids off the street. We met homeless families living in cars. We met different uh, Native Americans. We had Pablo, who was Native. We had different tribes coming together, Lakota, and just different people in the community that actually had their own identity as well as the community. And it's kind of a blend of all these different cultures being accepted, whether you be Native American, Black, Hispanic. I mean, the community itself was so open. We even it's like when I was talking about all the native Indians, I'm talking like from India, where we had Ali Akbar Khan and the college, where we would do tabla rasa. And it got so amazing that at one point we were putting on these festivals in Masonic temples in San Francisco with laser. And we did a whole decoration with flowers. And I mean, like, I couldn't plan these things if I tried. There's no way I could hire a Masonic temple. I don't know how the hell my life works because some of the most amazing thing happens because of the connections you have in this life. And Laser was, if he needed help, he knew he could just like, hey, Nick, I need to go to the forest. We're going to go and do driftwood. And I'll be like, what? And you're like, end up on some beach and collecting driftwood. And next minute we'd be up in the redwoods and we'd be picking pine cones. And the next minute I'd be up in juniper land. And it was just, Laser took me all over America with his dried flower arrangements. And I think he was the key to a lot of these communities because he was a traveler and he'd hear about something and we would just end up there and he'd start playing music or set up a DJ and want to do a gig one night. And I mean, like we did gigs in Taos, New Mexico. We did in San Francisco, out in Stinson Beach on the frontage. No planning whatsoever. Setting up bamboo poles, flags. Next minute we got a rave and a DJ and the cops come in. I mean, like, I can't explain to you how the family works. I think it works on two principles. Are you ready? Let's go. That's it. Not very many people can stop whining, put their shit aside long enough, or be big enough to actually take a challenge on at any point in their lives. And Burning Man, the Vulcan, that community inspired so many people to get out of the gutter and realize if you've got nothing, you've still got options. And most people wouldn't believe options I would give them because I remember for me, riding my bikes all over the place, I'd end up going through dumpsters living on boats. And I had a memory where I could remember where I'd find cutlery and pots and pans and computers. And next minute, I was riding to bread factories in the middle of, on the other end of Berkeley, actually. And I'd do martial arts at night with Scott Jensen and Tai Chi. And then literally pick up and finish my martial arts lesson and ride over to the bread factory. And like 10 o'clock at night, I'd cycle a bag of bread to People's Park and hand it out to peace and people and homeless people on the streets. And even after doing that, I'd ride all the way from that side of Berkeley, all the way through People's Park, all the way back down, all the way down through Oakland to Mothers and the Vulcan. And it was just a habit of mine to be industrious and find things. And I'd tell people where things were. They'd ask me. So it was just word of mouth. I'd figure something out and I'd tell people. And next minute I'd go there and it'd be a whole gallery of art. And I'd be like, well, how the hell did this happen? You know, it's like people,
Mother's Cookies.
I mean,
Mother's 9. Describe that space when you guys found it and what it looked like the last time you saw it.
Well, if I have to be honest, the whole space came about with Steve Rademacher, and he basically was saying to us it was an opportunity that we could get our own space out of it. So I was eager to get my own space because I didn't have a space of my personal space at the Vulcan Foundry. I was just a couch surfer. And for most people that don't know what couch surfing is, it's where you get accepted in the community and you trade your way around and people give you space to sleep and hang, even though you're not paying rent. It's because you kind of are volunteering or contributing to the greater good of the community. And I got a lot of grace points working at the Vulcan. And because I always worked on boats and I was always active, every time a project came up, a lot of building happened. And a lot of guys, street kids, had never built shit. So it was great. You know, I could build 2-story platforms or whatever I want, whatever we came up with. I remember at the Vulcan, it started out building a boat in the roof of the 4th story at 52, where you opened the front of the vessel up. And it was this big glass window with a gang plank, and you drop 4 stories down to about just above the 2nd story where there's a cargo net. And you'd jump into and fall into that, and you'd almost hit the ground on the impact, but you come up and roll out. And it was like we just did things and it just became a thing. You know, people were having fun and it just evolved. And that's what I loved about it. We didn't really, you can't do this. I don't think anybody ever said can't. I think if I said I was going to do something, people were like, okay, cool. And I'm a glutton for punishment. I get kind of happy helping people. It makes my day. And I think a lot of the things that happened, kind of the evolution of the Vulcan, Mother's 9, when I first got there, Steve basically told me that it was the old cookies factory, Mother's Cookies, and had been going from the early 1900s. It had retired the building 28 years before we got it, and most of the building had been shut down because of sugar corrosion in the pipes. So when we got it, there were parts of the building where we could just divide it into open spaces, and we divided it into 14 spaces. And people came into that space very readily. We had Chris Loomis, and Chris Loomis is an amazing artist. And then also ran into Fred, who became the manager there. But in the beginning, we were just grunting little carpenters working on a big space. And our space at number 9, Mother's 9, was amazing because there was a hidden compartment downstairs where we started doing indoor growing. And we had a whole magical affair where nobody knew that there was a hidden wall within the space. And it was a really big space that was hidden. We had indoor growing on it. And then in the basement of the space at Mother's Nine, we set up a workshop, and I built a couple of rooms where different people came in and took them. Ty and Stephen and his wife and their kids. And then we also had Burke, who took the upstairs little porch room. But then I built one room out of glass, and that was Marcia. Marcia was from Holland. She was
describe that
amazing.
floor. That floor was something.
So to explain it, each level of everything was salvaged. One of the days when I was working with Steve, he came by and he was like, need help. And it was like, okay. And he jumped on his pickup and buggered off. And he started pulling. We found a quick cash place, which had plexiglass sheeting. And we loaded this pickup and dropped it off and picked up more and picked it up. And what we ended up with these 6-foot sheets, 1.5 inches thick, 3.5 feet wide sheets of plexiglass. You kidding? You still got one? Oh, look at that.
I got from you. It's inch.
Oh, my word. No, dude, you should do a light table with that or something. But that's
all kinds of different things.
That's the plexi we got. And then on the first ground floor, we had studio.
Oh, you cut out.
Okay, so in when we set up the space, we set up a music studio that had donated to us 5,000 records, I think it was. And then we also were donated thousands of books. So I built a maze library. And then we built a shelf for the music. And then we created a living space where one was a clean room for Kevin, which he was a photographer. And then one of the rooms on the other space was built like we were pirates. They were all at different levels, and they were from the first, second, third, and fourth story. And the plexiglass we had in between walkways, so it looked like you were standing in thin air on the fourth floor. And Brad built a room which was a roll-up door floating in midair. I built some glass windows, and that was the little birdhouse for Marcia. And then we had Matt's room, which was kind of like, I don't know, a cell. Steve took another room. Then I had the most amazing room, which was the old air conditioning room, which is above the kitchen, and it was barely big enough for me to stand in. I think it was like 5'8", and I was 6'2", so I had always crunch in it. And my bed folded out of the wall, and my workshop folded out of the wall, and all my tools and everything were fitted into the ceiling of the second and third story kind of thing under my bed in the walls. So I lived in a very odd space for quite a while. But Mothers, I think what was the magic about Mothers was we created our open community where we opened and created a stage. We had different platforms that allowed DJs and musicians and local artists, including the local schools, local Mexican school and local Oakland schools, to come in and have theater groups in our space. It was that big. And it was so magical because we had collected a salvage pigeon system where there was this old postbox wall of little pigeonholes. And as we salvaged things, we'd fill up each pigeonhole with stuff we salvaged. So it'd be cornflakes and Rice Krispies and rice and toast and bread and salt. And they would just fill up. People would salvage or buy stuff and fill up. So eventually we had a selection of everything from jams to dates to nuts to, it was just amazing how many things came out of that, and the amount of food and things that we could provide in the community from donations and being open and having open community. The I think my favorite was the local Mexican school that came and did Cinco de Mayo, and they had a whole family, and we set it up and a theater for them, and they came in, and the kids were so surprised that they didn't even know that the space was really happening. So it was kind of nice. I mean, we had a private little community, Mother's Nine. It went on for a couple of years until we lost the building because of improprieties in payments and people managing, let's call it that. But yeah, it was just we trusted too many people, and some of the bad people we couldn't trust. So shit happened, you know.
Yeah, that's a tricky one in building community is,
Yeah, you've got to have people that actually respect the community and put the community first, and don't profiteer off the side or abuse their authority and do drugs, which was the honesty of what happened to us in some ways.
Yeah.
We were too honest and too open to people, and I didn't say anything I should have, but whatever, I'm more forgiving than most.
Yeah. Well, I had the lovely opportunity of living at Mother's Nine, and it was eye-opening and really broadened my community in major ways. Chris Radcliffe being one of the people I met there, yourself, Rademacher, a bunch of people.
No,
Still friends with many of them. What's that?
yeah. Yes, I agree. You would always meet some amazing people there. Um, you know, there's so many people that come to mind that I can't put anybody first. I think for me, Chris was like, for me, he was the linchpin. The other linchpin was Laser, and I happened to be the other linchpin. But I never thought of myself as the leader, the person in charge. I was just big brother. I just didn't allow violence to happen in our community. And if something happened, like it usually did, I was the only guy that would actually take the punch to the head. And that was the lesson I learned. It doesn't matter how big your heart is, you've got to be able to stand up to these people. And when they're bullies, you can get injured. So there was a couple of lessons I learned standing up to the community, but it created bonds of people that I admire, I still miss, I still think of daily.
Yeah, no doubt. And so
Yeah.
now that we've covered the basic background of how you got where you are now, in some sense, where are you now, and what are you doing in South Africa presently?
Well, I hate to tell you this, but right now, um, how about this story? Right now, I'm in Mossel Bay. I was working in a community called Kind of Mossel, or it was called, what was it? Kind of Community. That was it. It was funded by this guy called Mr. H. He's from England. He came to South Africa. He bought a piece of land here in Mossel Bay. He tried to start a collective community. And after 2 years of working in the community, I got kicked out of the community after I got assaulted by somebody, this young kid. And then I had to fight a lawsuit for 2 years now, where I won my lawsuit finally in August this year,
What
where
was
I
the
was
what was
proven
the claim against you? Assault?
that I assaulted this lady and her boyfriend, when actually her son ran out of the house and grabbed a rake and broke it on my shoulder. And lost his shit, and I didn't react. I didn't retaliate. I just basically took the rake away from him and removed myself from the situation. But it took 2 years going to court to prove that I was innocent. And I still haven't had any community responsibility for that because Mr. H has been kicked out of South Africa. So the whole collective, the kind of community here in South Africa, has actually come to an end. And most of the volunteers in this collective have actually left and gone back home to wherever they were from in South Africa. I was working with traditional Khoi, San, Zulu, Xhosa, Tswana, people from Venda. What most people in America don't realize is in South Africa, there is no language group. There's multiple groups at multiple times, depending where you are. So if I'm in Johannesburg, I can speak Zulu, Shangaan, and Xhosa. But if I go further to Orange Free State, then it gets more to Vendan, and there's different dialects as well. So there's a mishmash of dialects here in South Africa. Most people either speak English, Afrikaans, Zulu, or Xhosa. The intermediate language is called Fanagalo, which is a breakdown of multiple languages. So if you know the word in one language, they associate it with multiple languages, even though
kind of like a pidgin.
It's worse than pidgin language. It's kind of like saying shovel, and they go, yeah, for sure. They know what a shovel is.
Yeah.
So you're not telling them what to do. You're telling them, look, shovel. And they're like, aha, shovel. So, yeah.
So that brings up the question. Brings up the question with all of those multiple tribal languages. Is there a lot of, how well do those tribes get along in the current culture in South Africa? And what's going on there with that?
Well, okay, we've got a big hypocrisy here in South Africa. I don't know how to explain it simply, but the Dutch settlers settled the Cape, but they settled and traded with the Khoi, San, and Bushmen. And people from Holland speak Dutch. They don't speak Afrikaans. Afrikaans is the language that was made here in South Africa by the coloureds and them dealing with the Dutch, where they created a word like ubizi or water. Anything you talk about was in reference to a trading part. And the Dutch traded so well that they left indigenous blood with Dutch descendants married into it because of the way they settled in the Cape. Because in African culture, if you get accepted, you actually get married into their culture. So that's how a lot of this confusion happened. And from the Khoi and the San that actually lived in Cape Town, they were actually also kicked out of their traditional lands. And now, 200, 300 years later, we've got the ANC in government, which is not the majority blacks in South Africa. They are one part of, let's say, 40% of South African blacks. And then there's a large majority, let's say 50% of people that aren't being recognized.
Are you saying that real quick, are you saying that the ANC is a tribal affiliation more than an overarching party affiliation?
Yes. ANC is more Zulu.
I think that's lost on most people outside of
different. Yes. Well, they don't understand. And that's the big problem, is this misconception of things that are happening. Abe, I'm going to have to schedule for next week.
Oh,
so
great.
we can go to part 3. My phone's dying.
Oh, I love
and
it.
I don't want to leave you hanging with something unsaid. So we can start on South Africa. But basically, the ANC has one of the most universal declarations of equality in the world, but they refuse to acknowledge the Khoi and the San people. They speak Afrikaans. Now they're removing Afrikaans as the major language in South Africa, which is again 40 to 50% of the population,
Right.
and even more if you're including the white population that speak Afrikaans as well. So it's an indigenous thing that has been eroded. A lot of the people here in South Africa will not acknowledge that the Zulus came later. The ANC, the party, they are also invaders and settlers. They weren't here originally. They are not the original South Africans. Same as the people from Lesotho and Venda. They are part tribes and part represented, but they also have links to other parts of Africa like Zimbabwe, Zambia, Botswana, Angola, and Southwest Africa. So there's a lot of different types of people coming from different parts. But the ANC come from um, Central Africa. They're not actually, the Zulus are not original to South Africa. And they were migrating down when the Dutch started trading, and the Dutch came across them. There's a whole story about what's his name? John Ross, who was a little kid who washed up on the shores and became somebody of note in history that documented and gave a real account of Shaka Zulu and who he was in our history. But the Khoi and the San have actually always been here. They are all from the Southwest Africa, Angola. You find them all the way in Botswana, and they are the people of the language Afrikaans, and that houding, that thing that we say in South Africa, that culture comes from them. I couldn't laugh in Afrikaans if it wasn't for that marrying of the Dutch settlers with the colored people of South Africa. So that's where I've got to leave it for now.
Lots of love, brother, and love to everybody else who's out there attending this, and grace be upon you. Thanks for coming and joining me for this fantastic jaunt through a great storyline and a lot of experience there.